screen that is recording? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so the first question we're going to ask, if everyone could, out of the panel, could try and answer this question, that would be great. Do you think your gender has affected your career in any way? So I don't know who I'm going to start with, so if I just maybe pick someone at random. So just to confirm, the question is, do you think your gender has affected your career? So Carlene, are you okay to start off?
Yes, sure. Thank you. I mean, for me, I definitely think my gender has played a significant role. And the reason why I say that is because, as you can hear, I've got an accent. So, I'm originally from Cape Town in South Africa. And what that means is that I don't necessarily have my family, like my mum and dad, to help me, with any child caring kind of responsibilities I have. But just before I had my daughters, I remember at the age of 26, I thought, okay, I've got my master's in social work and I want to do my PhD. But I couldn't do that because obviously by then I had a family and I had to put that on pause. So 10 years later, I then started my PhD. But, it was about weighing up, the extent to which I was able to pursue what I've always wanted to do and making sure that my children aren't, suffering in the process of me not being around. And even during my PhD, it was hard for me to just go into a room and concentrate and work on it. I had to balance it with my kids being at school and all the activities. So I think there is that gender kind of element to my journey where I had to, as a mum, really weigh up, the extent to which I was able to pursue part of what I needed to do and ensuring that my daughters are still able to achieve and do as well as they do. Because the last thing I wanted was to come out having a PhD, but my daughters hating me in the process of, or maybe feel I've neglected them, and I think for women sometimes, well, that can be really, I'm not saying men don't go through similar kind of things, but just in my view, in terms of my own experience, that was my difficulty. And I always wanted to teach in our department, and since 2006 I wanted to teach there, and my husband told me, I'm sorry, you can't go and teach at at Norwich because we live in Colchester and the girls go to school in Colchester. And I had to wait till they were at secondary school before I could come to where I was, and that was in 2019. So it was a 13-year wait I had to do until I was able to be where I needed to be.
Wow, I live in Colchester. That's interesting. No, that's a good point. Thank you for sharing. Usha, are you okay to go next? Is that all right?
Yes, it is. Yes. Yes, I would say that definitely gender has been a factor. I would say lucky in some ways because I don't really have a partner or children or anything like that, so I don't really have dependents or caring responsibilities. But at least in definitely in UK academia, I would have to say that gender, apart from other factors, but gender has been a big barrier for me, definitely.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. I will dive more into like bits and bobs later on in different questions. Sarah, are you okay to go next?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of sort of different things I can add, because a bit like Carlene, I did my PhD a bit later on as a second career, and I started off and was a single mum for a long while. So you're sort of balancing all those things you want to do with actually the practicalities of everyday life, and actually academia in many ways has fitted well with that. I suppose the big thing that in my life is that I started out as a nurse. Why did I go into nursing? I think because that was a girl's profession, and it was just a way of leaving home and doing something that would fitted around as what girls did. And actually, has that been good to me? I think actually many of the things for starting out as a nurse have been very helpful to me, as much as I wouldn't really like to admit it, because I think I would have loved another path, really. But then I look at it now and think the women's research I'm doing, I really am enjoying. So that's a really positive thing about my gender, and understanding the context of women's lives. But does it also influence me? Because it doesn't make me feel very angry a lot of the time, as I watch girls growing up and I see women like you as students on here, and I get angry. And maybe I'm an age now where I'm allowed to get angry that there aren't enough changes about the things that I had at 18, and I look at you guys and think, I'm cross, not enough has changed.
Yeah. All right, that's perfect. Thank you. Anne, are you okay to go next?
Yeah, sure. To add to Sarah and to Carlene and Usha, for me, I've benefited from my gender. I have genuinely benefited from that. In that I went to university very late. I went as a mature student. And what drove me was the fact that I had my children before that, and I didn't like the cooking and the cleaning around the house, and I wanted to do something different. So it's because of my gender that having the children first that pushed me. I didn't want to do that anymore. I don't know, sorry, Carlene. So if you were a social worker in my life, you would have taken my kids. I genuinely wanted to do something different. And then through education and everything, so when I was doing my PhD, my children would sit with me and then we would study together. And again, I benefited from that. So drawing from what I was learning, and they said they got a PhD. They didn't get PhD just because they were young, because we studied together as a family. And again, I've had colleagues, female colleagues, who have really helped me along the way. And I like the nutter that we have together in terms of what it is that we're doing together. So have some real bonding with my female colleagues. Yeah, so I benefited from that in that sense. Yeah, but I share that. Yes, the literature or the research that are coming out suggests that if you do have children, because we work long hours, so you don't have weekends or you don't have holidays where you don't have to be looking at your screen and other things. So that impact, if you have family life, it will impact on your family life. And then if you have loving relationship, if you're in a loving relationship, it will impact on that, unless your partner really share what it is that you're doing. Yeah.
Perfect. So I think I've got Fiona and Joanna. So Fiona, are you okay to go next?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would say gender has 100% had an influence on my career. So from the perspective of being, you know, someone who is female passing and non-binary, there's, you know, all of the kind of latent prejudices that go on, but it's also affected me being non-binary in my department, and sort of seeing people's attitudes to others who are gender non-conforming in some way, non-binary, trans, that has added a whole different slant on like creating this atmosphere in my working environment. So yeah, I'd say definitely there's so many ways in which it's affected me, definitely.
Perfect, thank you. And Joanna, are you okay to end off again?
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, that's really interesting, listening to those different sort of stories in a way, and thinking about the fact that in some ways our gender probably has affected us in positive ways and in negative ways, and I think that's an important. So because your question is about influence, I'd say yes. I was thinking as I had time about what aspect I wanted to share in this moment, and I think for me, I'm a psychologist. Psychologists are predominantly women, but senior staff and management in psychology are men. You figure what I'm saying in that statement. Okay, so I did my degree I finished my degree in 1990, and you know, that's quite a long time ago. I've had many years that I've worked. And yes, I'm an associate professor, and that's a fantastic achievement. However, I think that my gender has held my progress, has held me up progress-wise. I think I've been passed over repeatedly. And I think that most of my male friends and colleagues have been ahead of me much of the way and reached professorships way before I have. So that is, I suppose, the answer is it determined the topic, yes, perhaps, that I chose, but it certainly has determined my current standing. And I'm very, very aware of that and extremely good about it.
Thank you all for sharing. It's nice to hear from different people's views. I'm going to pass over to Annabel, who's going to go on to the next question.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to say thanks everyone for sharing. It makes me kind of sad and angry to hear those things, but hopefully we're on the way to change. So this next one is kind of a hands up one. So if you want to contribute, just use the hands up feature. So have you ever been told that you are at a disadvantage? If so, how did that make you feel? Mainly in terms of your gender, but you can discuss other intersecting factors as well if you want to. So I'll go to Sarah first because that's the first hand I saw.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that you're told this. It's much more subtle than that. I think no one's going to say that. I don't think they'd have said it years ago, and they certainly wouldn't want to have it on record to say it now. But it's there. It's there, and I sort of echo what Jo was saying. Really, I work in an environment that is so heavily women because it's nurses and allied health professions, and then you look at how typically what people think of as being doctors, even though you have very equal recruitment of women into medicine. But who holds the higher positions? Who holds the cards? And when you hear colleagues who are very career focused and ruthless about it, and that doesn't always fit comfortably with some of the values that women hold dear. That's something about being a woman as well. So it's much more subtle than that, I think, would be my response.
I think Carlene I saw next.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Sarah, you're right. It is subtle, but in my case, so when you asked that question, I immediately could remember where it wasn't actually very subtle, and I'm glad you asked it because it gave me the opportunity to explain what it looks like and what it looked like in 2018, and I think that was a driving force where not only did my daughters finish primary school and on their way to secondary school, but it drove me to think I need to get out of the department. What happened was they were recruiting for a course leader position in the education department. I'm more qualified than my boss and the dean, but I've never lauded my qualifications over people because, for me, my job suited me perfectly because it allowed me to drop my kids off at school and then pick them up again and everything. So it suited me in that moment. But what made me really frustrated was when I decided, okay, let me apply for this post because it lines up with my sociology of education kind of career, and I thought, let me just go for this job. And at the interview, and bearing in mind the other person that applied didn't have any publications. He was another man, but he was friends with the boss who's a male, and all of them in senior positions are men anyway. So I just thought, well, on paper I have a strong chance. I also have been doing this job for over 2 years, so I know what it's about as such. And during the interview, my boss asked me, and he said, well, this job or this position, some of the classes you have to teach is on a Wednesday evening, and I know you've got 2 daughters. Wouldn't that be a problem for you? Because that will make it hard for you to be at home looking after your daughters while lecture starts at 6:30 with these students. And I sat there, and the HR person sat next to him, and I was so angry. And I said to him, I can't believe you're asking me that, because you wouldn't have asked that man this question in the interview, and I wouldn't have applied for this job if I didn't feel I was able to teach that class on a Wednesday evening. So in my case, unfortunately, it wasn't subtle. Normally, I'm a very easygoing person and I don't want to upset people, but I just thought, right, I'm going to have to challenge their decision. And I did cause a big fuss, but also then realized I didn't want to stay longer working for a place like that. Hence, this is where I ended up. So it all came together, but that was my experience.
Thank you so much for sharing. Fee, I think I saw your hand next.
I think Joanna might have got her hand in there first if she wants to.
Sorry, I don't know.
Oh no, I just didn't want to barge in.
I don't mind.
Yeah, so I had an experience where I was told that I'd be at a disadvantage as a woman. And I think the person telling me sort of wanted it to be a kind of solidarity thing, like bear this in mind so that you see it coming. Ironically, having had it pointed out didn't do anything to kind of warn me, or I was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, we all know that's there, whatever. So philosophy is a very, very cis male dominated subject, and in a way it sounds, I always think it sounds funny saying this, but because it's so cis male dominated, and especially in my department, I didn't actually notice a lot of the sexism that was going on, as in I just internalized it and directed it towards myself because I didn't have other women peers for me to share experiences with. There are kind of, I had women friends in PPL in a wider sense, or in humanities, but I didn't have other philosopher colleagues to say, is this just because they're being sexist? So I kind of had all of my kind of, as you know, probably a lot of people have, imposter syndrome, having come at university from a slightly odd angle, all of these different things. So I found it way too easy to turn dismissive behavior against myself and go, oh, it's because they don't think I'm good at this, or it's because they think that my research isn't up to standard, it's because, and I realized after a couple of female colleagues were hired, I started to realize, hang on a minute, no, I've been, like, not only is it here, but I've been internalizing this against myself. That's awful. And so I found it quite ironic that even though I had that warning and I was told, yeah, you're at a disadvantage in a number of different ways, it didn't really help me ward anything off. I was still quite blinkered by it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Jo, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I've just been sort of thinking while everyone's been talking about what it was I wanted now. And I think really I want to say two things. One is that it is often not stated and yet is incredibly enforced, a sort of a la Sarah. And that's microaggressions on daily, hourly, minute by minute basis. There's multiple ways which we could unpick, however much you want to in this conversation. But secondly, actually, even if you have been told that you're at a disadvantage, that doesn't help, because you can't overcome that. You can't overcome overt disadvantage, and you can't overcome covert, because the system is that stacked. I'm sorry, that's depressing. So I want to just agree with my sisters in the space that spoke before me.
Thank you. Usha, do you want to go?
Yes, thank you. Mine's a bit of a one-off, I think. I'm not sure. So my take on this would be slightly different. As I said, has my gender been a disadvantage? Yes, definitely. Have I been told that? Yes, definitely. But I have a bit of an unusual situation in the sense that I think I've lived and worked in the UK for 18 years, and a good part of that has been spent working in academia. So I have other intersectionalities. Ethnicity and racial background is big for me, and also because for the first sort of 10 years of my career, I was reliant on a work permit. So when you rely on your institution for your ability to live and work and actually live in a country, that puts you in a position of powerlessness. So for me, that was a big factor. And within academia, I've faced discrimination and bullying from everyone. I've worked in environments where women have been incredibly supportive. Equally, I've worked in environments where absolutely the worst, vicious, most bullying behaviors actually came from women, and the men were very supportive. I've worked in environments where my ethnicity and background were an advantage. Equally, I've worked. I became a naturalized citizen about 10 years ago. So I've worked in an environment where my background was a massive disadvantage. In contrast, I also work with businesses. So perhaps I'm not like a pure academic. I work with businesses, I do consulting, and I often find that there people tend to take you on face value. They take you based on what you know and how you deal with them. I'm a board of director. I sit on boards. I'm a trustee and a non-executive director, and everyone takes you seriously because they assess you on the basis of what you know. And in my experience, the most viciousness and the stress has always been within academia. So I wouldn't tend to take a bit of a black and white view on this. I personally wouldn't say that men are bad, women are good, or solidarity, because I've experienced all of these things. For me, I think the key would be power. If you are connected and networked to sources of power, and if you've got a patron, I think your life is a lot easier regardless of your background. So if you've got someone looking out for you, if you've managed to jump on the bandwagon, then I think pathways are smoothed. If you don't have those things working in your favor, I think you have more hurdles to jump over, and that's definitely been the case with me as well, because I've never been part of a power group in a circle. So I tend not to take a specific black and white either or view of saying that women are always supportive, because that's I'm sure it's different for other people, but that's certainly not been my case. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I think you've pointed out something really important there about how it's really nuanced, and the idea of power and who has that power. So thank you. Anne, do you want to go?
It's interesting listening to my sisters and then talking about power and internalized oppression and the system and everything. And for me, it's the subtlety in terms of how it's done or what we do to ourselves. And in looking at the intersectionality, it's interesting that Usha is talking about intersectionality. There's a paper that I read recently about looking at intersections between foreignness and gender. And sometimes things that we do to ourselves. So when I was reading that what really struck me, and then thinking about myself, is about, I don't know whether you're familiar with Semlyen's notion of stranger. And that was me. So when I went into academia, I was using Semlyen's notion of stranger. Semlyen talks about the fact that the stranger is not the person who comes and leave tomorrow, but the stranger is the one who comes and then stay. It's not a wanderer, but one who come and stay. But in academia, there are intersections, seriously. And then sometimes what I felt was that there's a sense of belonging. You feel that you belong and you don't belong, or what Saint talks about the outsider within. And there's these rules of the game, or what Bourdieu says, the dosa, the rule of the game. So there are things that you need to know within the power system in order to progress or to get the promotion. There are certain things that you need to know, but you don't know it, and no one tells you about that. And that can sometimes position or affect your ability to progress. So you feel that you're part of a system, but you are not part in that sense, because there's certain things that you need to know in order to help you, but you don't know it. Yeah, so you belong and you don't belong, but no one tells you. And it's so important for me that when I came on first, I asked you about whether you want to go into academia. If you do want to go, you will feel that stranger, you have that stranger syndrome, where sometimes you belong. So someone will talk about research and they will use certain words to exclude. And then someone will talk about it and they will use certain words to include you. So you're part of a system, but you're certainly not within that system. And there's all these power dynamics that's really interesting. If you can use some of these theories to help you to understand the structure, that will help. So I tend to use Bourdieu's DOSA, the rule of the game. So what is the rule of the game? What should I need? What should I need to know in order to be aware that I do fit in here or I don't fit in here? And why is that coming from? What have I internalized? Why am I feeling the stranger syndrome? Yeah, so very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Maisie, do you want to go to the next one? Just also wanted to say everyone's contributions have been really, really useful. So thank you, everyone. I don't want it to feel like we're just rushing on, but there's quite a few questions we want to get through.
Yeah, so thank you all. So the next question again is a hands up question, so you don't have to contribute if you don't want to. So the next question is, what do you think could be done to make your field more representative / equitable, and how can we get more women in these fields? Joanna, if you want to start.
I do want to start. I just want to jump straight in. It's the same with white privilege. Until men choose to stand back, until people with privilege choose to give up their privilege and recognize the privilege they hold, asking people who are outside, who are excluded, who are minoritized, to do anything to make any change is at best unfair. And I think it's almost impossible. So I just wanted to jump straight in with represent, any shifts that we needs to actually come from those who have the power. And that is such a big ask when it comes to gender. So that's what I jumped straight in with. I'm happy to come back with something a bit more nuanced, maybe later, but I was straight in.
Straight in there. No, that's fine. Thank you. Carlene, do you want to jump in next?
Yeah, sure, Maisie. I think what comes to mind too is, when you're working in an environment, and Anne mentioned the word structure, structure does play a big role, and, institutional changes are required, and sometimes when it comes to institutional kind of changes, it means like people and settings having to be prepared to give up those kind of spaces of privilege, and you'd often find that actually there's a lot of lip service that's being paid, and it also comes down to the whole thing around recruitment. So when people are applying, I'd be interested to know how many people have applied and who are these people that managed to be offered interviews. And and so I think on that question you've just asked, institutional kind of policies and decisions play a key role in terms of who is actually going to be given that space, like whether women or men, and often there are those kind of hidden kind of assumptions that's being made, because people your age, for example, if you had to apply, they probably would think, oh, she hasn't had kids yet, so if we appoint her versus a man who are not going to take maternity leave, for example, that in itself are some hidden kind of issues that aren't often vocalized but do play a role in terms of the opportunity women may get in workplaces.
Thank you.
Maisie, I think you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Perfect. I'm just going to read out, thank you for that. I'm just going to read out a few of the things that people have put in the chat. So Sarah said, until more men and nurses and other allied health professionals, the salary issues and inequalities will not even begin to be understood. Women will continue to serve. and Fiona's agreed about the systematic power imbalance, and power abuse can't be combated until those who have power are willing to stand aside. And the same with Usha. For me, again, it is power. I've sat in on more than my fair share of recruitment panels, and I've had had first-hand experience of viewing how the system is rigged in favour of those within those power networks, men and women. And Joanna, but allies are usually part way to giving up power and recognising privilege. It's reaching those who are utterly not engaged. So if that's everyone, I'm going to move on to Annabel, who will ask the next question. Oh, Anne, you jumped in there right at the end.
Yeah, so sorry about that. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Foucault, and Foucault says that where there's power, there's resistance. Yeah, and I would say that when we all come together, we can resist. So the system isn't that great, but we can resist. So where there's power, there's resistance, and I think for one of the things that we can do moving forward is about the dosa. So explaining the dosa to our colleagues who come after us, explaining the system if you do know about what to do. Some of the things that I do with people that I mentor in terms of progression and then gain promotion is the first thing is to get the promotion document and then say, this is what you need to read, because no one will tell you, so that you know when you are going through that, you've got things that you need to accumulate in order for you to get that. And then as you are walking along, you accumulate that so that it doesn't come as a surprise. You don't have to wait for a long time in order to do that. Yeah.
And you practice what you preach, and because you do exactly that with me, you give me information, because in academia, there's so many hidden stuff that people don't share. But Anne is one of those people who has figured out things along the way and are prepared to share, knowledge and that. So thanks for that, Anne.
Thanks, Carlene. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Anne. I'm just going to pass over to Annabel, who will go on to the next question.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's really interesting, especially as a sociology student, hearing certain concepts being brought up is really, really interesting. So this is a question for everyone, but again, if you don't have anything to say or it's kind of not your area, that's completely fine. Do you feel that women's research is valued at the same level as men's research? So I'm going to go to Sarah first. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Rookie error. I think I'd got it by now. Yeah, I mean, if any of you haven't read Invisible Women, I would encourage you to read that. I mean, why are issues like endometriosis, all gynecological issues, why are they so under-researched? Why are there so few women in medical trials? Well, because they're complicated, because they have menstrual cycles and they have the menopause. How ridiculous is that? How is it that we don't recognise symptoms of, for example, a heart attack, and how that presents so differently in women as in men? These are all really important research questions, and women are excluded from research. And the work I do around domestic violence and women in the criminal justice system whose offending behaviours are so different to men, but often are exploited by men. That's why they're in that system. These are all such important issues, because women can be at the heart of their families, and therefore some of these behaviours are then being passed to the next generation. They're vital things we understand. And yes, if I said I was doing women's research, yeah, I don't think that would be seen as interesting as someone who's doing cardiology research. I mean, that's the real brunt of it. I think that's absolutely right. But that doesn't mean I don't do it, because you have to do what's authentic and things that you think are really important. And that's a really fantastic thing I think I should say about academia. If there's something you really care about and you're someone who's a good networker, maybe, that's a skill I feel I have. Is that a women's skill? I don't know, but that's enabled me to build up very good networks to do really, I hope, very authentic research.
Thank you. Yeah, it just reminds me of how I've seen some people say about the vaccine recently potentially causing blood clots, and a lot of people are saying, that's a side effect of contraceptive pills. Like, women have had to deal with that as a potential side effect for years. But I will go to Fee next.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in philosophy, there's quite an overt thing of, first of all, there's a general trend of, every philosopher wanting to say that somebody else's work isn't real philosophy. I don't really know why. But there's a big kind of thing that feminism isn't real philosophy, or if it's allowed within a philosophy department, it's for the women to do, almost as though if you are a woman, certainly when I went into my PhD, it was expected. I'd have people come up to me at conferences and say, oh, are you doing feminism or ethics? And I was like, neither. And I had a lot of interests when I started out, and I sort of really resented the idea that I was being told what to do. I had lots of interest in feminism, but I was like, well, I'm also interested in philosophy of science. Am I not allowed to do that? And I've never been massively one for doing what I'm told. So in a way, I kind of wish I hadn't, resisted that, because I could have just started off doing feminism and done it the whole time. But there's still, I still hear my colleagues frequently say, for instance, on social media or in meetings, oh yeah, but we all know this is complete insert swear word here. And so it's very much kind of looked down on, but I think a couple of people have mentioned this kind of the positive aspect in that it's kind of given me the anger to sort of encourage students and support them when they are interested in doing a dissertation on feminism, and I can kind of be there and say yeah, imposter syndrome, that's a real struggle, and it's hard having some of the other academics kind of looking down on this subject. My dissertation student today actually asked me about who was going to second mark her dissertation, and what if it was someone who's aligned themselves with very strong trans exclusionary positions, and that was a genuine worry for her. Because she's arguing against trans exclusionary positions, and I think it's also something I've seen in politics as well. My friends in politics who study gender studies, they also get this sense of, oh yeah, but that's not real politics. So it's constantly being marginalized in actually quite an overt way, as well as all the kind of subtle, covert and kind of microaggressive ways as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really interesting. Especially, I think we see that in sociology as well. If there's a female sociologist, it's kind of implied that, oh, they must be a feminist. They must be talking and writing about feminism. But it's like, no, they can talk or write about whatever area they want to. Anne, do you want to go next?
Yeah, it's just to really encourage you. So nothing really to add, but to encourage you that women can do a good research as men. So we can do everything, seriously. So always have that in mind. And I know the systems and structures will position you in such a way to make you think and believe that you can't, but you can. Yeah, so keep on doing what you're doing, because you can.
Thank you, Anne. Our ray of sunshine and positivity. I think if anyone else has anything to say, let me know. I don't want to cut anyone off, but we can move on to the next question. Maisie?
Yeah, perfect. That was really interesting, actually, because I think I was having a conversation with Annabel the other day for one of our questions that we're doing for sociology, and I was looking at BAME mothers, and I was doing all this research, and I was thinking there isn't actually a lot of research in that area, and I was hunting and hunting to find this one thing that I wanted to find, and there is a lot of lack of research in certain areas as well. But going on to the next question. Growing up, did you see many people that looked like you in your field you are in now? Or so any role models, did you have anyone to look up to? So if you could put your hands up for this one, that would be great.
Is that a no?
Oh, Anne's in there. Anne's in there.
I do, but I wanted to give others the opportunity because I kind of feel like I'm taking over. I think one person who really inspired me, and this is my background is palliative care. One person who really inspired me was called Dame Cecil Saunders. So she was the person who led the palliative care movement in Europe. She set up the first palliative care in Hackney, St. Joseph Hospice. And she really inspired me. I followed her, and she always said that you should be the voice for the voiceless. She first trained as a social worker, and then she trained as a palliative care consultant. And she described that no one should die going through pain. And she really genuinely inspired me to be who I am today. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Fiona, do you want to go in next? Oh, you're on mute. Don't worry, we've all been there. I think you're just muted.
I was so anxious about turning my hand off. Thank you for that question. It really made me think. I think my answer is more in terms of who wasn't there as a role model, or who was there as the wrong role model, so to speak. And I think, yeah, I've done a lot of reflecting on how I got into academia, how I started my PhD, why I made the decisions I made, and all of the different factors that I wasn't aware of at the time, a lot of them to do with health or my past or things like perhaps disability, and not quite seeing certain effects for what they were. But I'm very aware now, looking back on it, that I did not have any women philosophers teach me at all. There was one woman PhD student in my department, and she kind of latched on to me. She was very fierce character, and she just sort of decided she was taking me under her wing, and I called her my kind of philosophy mum. She was incredibly powerful for me to know, because she was so honest and direct, and she wasn't afraid of certain aspects of my life that other people were a little bit scared off by. She wasn't afraid to ask me about the more difficult aspects of my life, and she was a really wonderful presence to have, but she was still doing her PhD. I had amazing role models. I did a joint degree in literature and philosophy. I had amazing role models in literature. One lecturer in particular who I still admire so much. And it just made me think about, like, you know, who were my role models when I was going into philosophy? And really, I looked up to one of the people in the department, because they came from a very working class background, so they seemed to kind of resonate a little bit more with, like, connecting with having had a bit of a struggle getting to university. But actually, in the end, they were sort of not the worst, but I want to say, like, one of the worst possible people who could have stood as a role model. And I think that I ended up giving their advice too much sway, if you see what I mean. And that was less than helpful, shall we say. But yeah, these days I definitely have a sense of who my role models are within feminist philosophical literature, and you know, I go to their blogs so often. I follow their Twitter account. It's where I go when I kind of need sort of a bit of nourishment and sustenance, and I'm so thankful that they're there doing the work that they do.
No, that's really great to hear. I've always thought I'm quite lucky in the fact that my mum's kind of like I suppose what you call like the breadwinner. Like she does well for herself. Like she's a nurse, and I've always felt that I'm quite lucky growing up to have like that powerful, inspirational woman in my household. And I think it does differ for how people grow up with the role models that are around them, on how strong you become and what your influences and aspirations are like. So I've always felt I'm quite lucky to have that big figure in my life as a mum, just going off what Carlene said about her daughter. Joanna, do you want to jump on?
I do. I think it's really telling that when you ask the question that you were met with a wall of silence, and because it's on video, you'll see that. And as you can see, we've been writing a little bit to each other in the chat about it, because as a group of academics that you've brought together today, we've probably never had this conversation with each other as a group. There were no role models for me. I didn't see anybody like me, and I don't often see somebody like me. But what I do is I have spent most of my working life trying to make sure that I am a role model for others, to A, rectify perhaps the gap that was in my life, and B, I have been, I suppose, in some ways a bit of a trailblazer. I tend to find that I am carving a path. I tend to find that I'm the first person in a number of ways to do things. I am brave, and I'm sort of quite driven, and I think that those things are really important, but they're not we shouldn't have to be like that. So instead, what I want is to demonstrate to young women, to others, actually what's possible. And I made a note for myself that I have no idea if you're going to come back to this. So before I miss out an opportunity to say this, I'm going to use this moment to say this. What I choose to do, and have spent most of my working life doing, is being a mentor, is amplifying women, amplifying colleagues, amplifying younger women, offering opportunity wherever I can, creating opportunities for women to have a space, to have a voice. And I hope that, and I know that this has been said to me, so I'm able to say I've been a role model to people, and I will continue to do that. And that's why I would take part in something like this. I do want to be honest and say it hasn't been easy. I don't want to lie and pretend that it hasn't been difficult, because it has, and it continues to be difficult. But if there are women around who are prepared to make space and create opportunity through mentorship and through being a role model, because what is a role model? It's demonstrating what an opportunity, and I could do that, that could be me. By doing that, by making ourselves visible wherever possible, I think that's a way to remedy it. And I kind of wrote that in the chat. I'm doing what I can to remedy what's missing in my younger days. And that's not to say that I didn't have a handful of people around me that time and again, every now and again, but they were men, because I didn't know any women that were in those roles, that were looking out for me, that were creating opportunities for me. That did not happen to me, and I make sure that will, around me, I make sure that I do the absolute opposite of what was done to me.
I think that's amazing. I think mentoring is obviously a really good way to inspire other people. And I think a lot of people here will probably go away feeling inspired today as well, which is kind of one of the things that we wanted from this panel. Carlene, did you want to say something, or are you...
Yeah, just very briefly, I think for me, similarly, it's very hard to find someone that looked like me, growing up because of the race issue, but also, growing up, I grew up, just in a very deprived kind of area. So that was even harder to find those kind of examples. My dad was a strong role model, but I was looking at my mum, and my mum she was also strong, but not as strong as my dad as such. I think I was looking at how my mum was playing off in front of my eyes, like being subservient to my dad, that I became the exact opposite, as such. But I used, the experiences I had to try to later supplement, both. But I think it is where I have had the opportunity to influence, students is when I was teaching A-level students, because some of those students had very low confidence levels and didn't believe they were able to attain what it is they needed to attain. And I think that is sometimes really important to realize that, we're now at university and, those are the spaces we occupy. But sometimes there are children like me from my background that enter those kind of places that are feeling completely overwhelmed. But if they sort of more or less know they have an academic who's not embarrassed about her background, who is willing to navigate and, give people opportunities, I think that is what we need, people who are prepared to help other people along. And like what Anne has been doing in the department with me, I'm just really, really grateful for that, because we need a lot more of those kind of people.
Perfect, thank you. We're just going to move over to Annabel for the next question. Thank you all for sharing.
Yeah, I think a lot of you've raised a really interesting point about how sometimes if you're faced with an adversity, it can be hard to find the strength to overcome that. So that's kind of this next question is, what, if any, barriers did you face when applying to work in academia? But also, how did that did it fuel you or did it set you back? I think if we do hands up for this, if anyone wants to contribute. Yep, Jo, go ahead.
I will. I think I'll add another layer to this from my perspective and disclose a little further, I think, which might help me answer your question in the way that I want to, as honestly as possible. So there are a couple of things strike me, and there are women here who have faced racism, which I haven't directly faced, but I do have quite an odd surname, and it's always occurred to me that they're probably assuming that that about me anyway, which I always found quite sort of ironic, really. But what I've discovered, what my process has been, so that whether that's been my point is whether that's been an issue or not in terms of application, I've no idea. But what has been an issue is if you take one glance at my research profile, if you look at my work, most of my work has been around LGBT+, and that's my research. That's also been, that is actually my identity. And I'm absolutely certain that the intersection of my sexuality and my gender has been hugely significant in my journey as a barrier. I remember an interview with somebody who is now on the news quite often during the pandemic, so I won't name them, but I had an interview. They're based at a well-known London university, and I had a job interview many years ago, and one of the questions, because it was an academic job, was going to be, tell us about a research project. It's going to be one of those kind of nice sort of gentle questions. And I said, yes, so the project I want to tell you about is a project looking at lesbians and health promotion. And I just saw the panel, the eyes of the panel glaze over, and they had decided that moment I wasn't going to get the job. And I knew that. And that is not the only example I had at all. And my lived experience has been that sexuality and its intersection with gender is very, very significant, because I know that there will be gay men that will tell you that they have faced barriers, but they certainly have not faced barriers the way that queer women have. So I think it's very, very important that I share that story, because this is a panel discussion about women, and that intersectionality is so hugely impactful for women. I know it is also for men, is certainly around ethnicity. I'm not undermining, we're not getting into comparisons, but I wanted to share that is actually that's been a really, really significant factor throughout my career. And it has stopped me applying for things. It stopped me considering whether I would be considered. I've thought about, and you asked a question earlier and I didn't say it to that question, but I'm going to say it now. Yes, somebody did say to me, be careful about, your identity is going to get in the way. And it was a very, very interesting and important moment. It was about 2003. I can remember it. I know what the effervescence of the moment. And my research that I'd done was the story I just told you about lesbians and health promotion. And I said, what worries me is if I do that research, will I always be considered as an LGBT researcher? And in doing so, will that hold me back? Now, I don't know that that is true, but it was the decision I made. I have taken that path, and whether or not that's held me up, I don't know. But I still notice, less so than they're used to, I still notice the eyes glaze if I say, sexuality or LGBT in front of what I say. And I think that's a relevant example to share. So I thought I'd just be completely open and honest and tell you that's there are multiplicities to being a woman that play a part, and that's a story I felt. Oh, thanks, Anne. And I just felt that was a story I wanted to share because because I wanted to just be really open with you. And that's not to say that I'm not got lots of positive things to share with you. And if you ask me a question that allows me to say them, I will. But currently I'm still sharing the stories as dependent on the questions that are being asked. So thank you for your time. And I think I'm getting lots of really nice messages. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, especially because that is a really kind of sad situation and, very personal. So I'm really grateful for you sharing that. And also wanted to point out how I think quite a few of you picked up on a really interesting idea of how our identity can be used to help us if we choose to, but it shouldn't put us in a box in that way. People assuming, oh, you're part of that community, so you're only going to research that thing, or you're only going to be interested in that thing. I think that's a really interesting point that a lot of you have made. Usha, do you want to go next?
Yeah, like I said, I think everyone's story is very unique, and intersectionality is definitely an issue for everyone in some way or the other, I think. For me, did I face barriers and what did I do to overcome them? It's different because, like I said, I was born and raised in India, and there, being a woman in India is an everyday story of facing sexism and sexual harassment every single day. In most parts, in still even today, you're just nothing more than an object, and you have no identity. I mean, at the moment, at the end of October last year, I lost my older sister. She was my last surviving relative. So I've just sort of started the process of dealing with the legalities in the estates after I lost my mother 3 years ago. And it's incredibly difficult because nobody even acknowledges your existence unless you are the daughter or wife of someone. Either the succession laws are so outdated, and they won't even accept an identity which has your name unless it has a daughter of so and so or a wife of so and so kind of thing. So that's that's the sort of extent of sexism and sexual harassment that I faced in India. And of course, skin color. People think that skin color is only here, but actually, as a dark-skinned Indian, racism was again an everyday part of life because you were not treated as worthy if you were slightly dark-skinned, and that's even from your own family members. In the UK, however, like I said before, my barriers have been different. A significant portion of my challenges have come from the fact that for a lot of things, I fell into academia because I had nowhere else to go, because I was from outside the EU, and therefore whichever jobs I applied, I was overqualified. I had the qualifications, but because I wouldn't be, the businesses wouldn't apply for a work permit for me, I couldn't go for those jobs, even though I knew I was qualified and I could do so. Almost by default, I kind of ended up in academia because university sector were one of the few areas where you could process a work permit. And even then, it's been sort of consistently, I sound as if I'm a bit of a moaning misery, but these are just the facts of what I've faced. So it's been a consistent facing of discrimination based on skin color, based on ethnicity, and based on your nationality and work permit status. Having said that, I think I've you know, in the HE sector, I've worked in many institutions, and I know that there is a power lobby in every institution. In some lobbies, in some universities, depending on the location, I know that the ethnic minority lobby can be incredibly powerful and corrupt. Equally, there are some institutions where certain lobbies can be quite powerful, and I've had firsthand experiences of those as well. And I think my conclusion is that, and I sort of contrast that with my dealings with consultancies and businesses around the world, and you know how they sort of treat you and so on. So my view, probably it's a cynical view, but probably a very, very hard-headed, realistic view, is that I think we across the HE sector, we have an institutional problem. There's definitely lots of inequalities, whether this is class inequalities, whether this is gender inequalities, whether these are ethnicity inequalities. And the more the sector talks about it, the less they do something. And I have been at the receiving end of endless. I mean, for example, there was one university where I worked for 5 years. So it was a huge jump for me because it was a 5-year work permit. And my boss was a British Indian. And every single day of those 5 years, he would harass me, he would bully me, he would verbally abuse me. He nearly came very close to physically assaulting me a couple of times. And the worst of those people were the women, who were vicious, who were horrible. And I literally left that institution in an ambulance. I went in to give but I stuck it out because I was incredibly stubborn. And I even contemplated suicide, but eventually I was stubborn because I wanted to stick it out until I got that naturalization and indefinite leave to remain. And the minute I got that, I went and applied for another job, and then I handed in my resignation to the dean. HR didn't do anything about the bullying complaints that I raised, and I collapsed in the dean's office, and I had to be stretchered out. Apparently my heart stopped beating, and then I woke up in the emergency room. And then I signed off stress for the 2 months notice period that I had to give, and I developed agoraphobia. I couldn't leave the house for 2 months, because even now I can't go back to that university. If I go to that city, I start getting panic attacks, and it was that level. So I think that sort of it flipped a switch for me, because at that time I stopped believing that institutions will support you, because I have very, very little faith and trust in systems, in institutions, in HR processes. And the more institutions talk about equality and diversity and fairness and, you know, best practice, the less they do about it, regardless of which university is. So for many, many years, I've then invested in my own personal brand. I have my own website, I have my own blog, I create my own resources, I share them separately with students, I do my own teaching. I have a very transactional relationship with my work. I don't rely on it I'm not emotionally dependent on it. I take a lot of pride in my work, but I decided a long time ago that I would never ever be emotionally reliant on the job or the workplace, that I wouldn't create an identity, because I've seen a lot of people who've fallen apart. I know of colleagues whose entire lives were invested in the campus, and last year when we went into lockdown, their entire lives fell apart. And a long time ago, I determined that I would never ever be reliant on an institution. So regardless of which university I work in, I have very little faith in universities. I have very little faith in HR. I have very little faith in the HE sector. So I invest in my personal brand because I'm incredibly tough and resilient. And also, you know, a lot of the things that we are facing at the moment with the changes to online learning and things like that is things that I've seen coming my way because of the contacts I have. I know that this was coming our way. I think the pandemic has just accelerated what we are undergoing. So nothing of what we have experienced so far is a surprise. And I also can predict what are the changes that are going to come. And I think I'm better prepared than most to face those changes, because I know that the institution doesn't change enough. So for me, I think it's because I've learned from trial and error to be tough, to be strong, to be reliant on myself. I have very low trust levels in the institution, you know, if that's cynicism, I don't know, but that's just a very hard-headed realism. So the bottom line is I don't trust my employer. I don't trust any employers, and I rely on myself, on my own resources and my own personal brand.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think everyone can agree how brave and strong you are, and I think we can all say just very sorry for everything you've been through. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing. We can go on to the next question, Maisie, if you want.
I'm just looking at the time, and we have 15 minutes. Should I go on to the next one? Yeah. I don't know if people have a lot of questions and stuff.
Or okay, why don't you can ask the last one if you want, because I think that's maybe more, and then we'll go on to questions.
Yeah. Okay. So the last question is, can you name a time where a male colleague has contributed to progressing gender equality? So whether that's in the workplace or in general, if anyone has had a time. I think.
You mean like progressing gender equality, yeah?
Yeah, so trying to, like, stepping forward if they think that something's not fair, or I don't know, like putting themselves forward.
Being a good ally, anything along those lines.
Anne?
I've got two people that I know, and one looking at gender issues and intersectionality. And I don't know whether are we supposed to mention names, or can I just say two people? Yeah. So, and these are from UEA. So I've had two colleagues who really have helped in that area. Yeah, I need to mention, one is my head of school, really interested in promoting gender equality. Is very, very helpful in showing the system and everything. And then I'm very pleased about what the Vice Chancellor is doing in the area of racial equality. So he really is doing something, and he's leading UK universities in this area. Yeah, and he should be commended. It's not an easy task, but he's at least he's tackling that. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Carlene?
Yep, for me it's also to male colleagues, but not at UEA at all. Different universities, but clearly giving me opportunities to develop skills in getting involved in the research, building my academic profile. Other than Anne, I haven't had any experience of women academics helping me along the way. It was more these two male senior colleagues, and so that's why I can agree with what Usha was saying earlier, that sometimes we make the assumption that there are other women in the workplace that will stand in solidarity, and actually in my experiences along the way it's never happened, other than Anne sitting there. That is living proof that that is the possibility.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. I think there's been some really good discussion and points raised, and I think the chat is really nice to watch as well, like everyone responding and the positivity and like reacting with hearts and stuff. I think that's really nice to see as well. We're going to open up the floor to anyone who has any questions for the panel. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask? I don't know if you can come on mic if you want to, or you can write it in the chat, that's fine.
Yeah, we'll give people a second to type if they want to, or think of something.
Yeah. If not, we can ask that one more that we have if people don't have anything. Just thought we'd.
Could I ask a question of somebody who's written something in the panel? I don't know if they'd be prepared to talk about it, but Andrea's written something about doing research about violence in HE institutions. And I mean, that would be quite nice. I'd be interested to hear from that, actually, if that person was prepared to tell us a little bit about it. Because structural violence actually is very much overlooked.
And all the ways in which the institutions protect and bury that kind of activity. So I'd echo that. If that would be interesting to find out, wouldn't it?
Hi.
Feel free, go ahead.
feel a little bit like I've been put on blast slightly, but I guess that is what happens when you like put loads of like comments in the chat. Yeah, I am. Yes, I'm a postgraduate researcher at UEA. I'm in the Arts, Media and American Studies school, but I'm quite interdisciplinary. So I do media and politics, a bit of sociology, like feminist theory, that kind of thing. And yeah, I've been here for full-time and part-time since 2016. So when I didn't get any funding when I started, and you can apply for funding at various points during your postgraduate research, but I was never successful. And although this can obviously never be proven, right? I feel like part of the institutional mechanics are definitely that my research is about the experiences of female students in higher education, specifically at UEA, as like a microcosm example. So I do focus groups and interviews, and I've done like some surveys and stuff. So I talk to UEA students who identify as women or as female, and we talk about gender-based violence that they experience more generally, and we talk about experiences they've had at UEA, and I also, so I take their those transcripts, but I also look at the institution itself. So I look at policy documents, and I look at stuff that the student union has done. I look at somebody mentioned the vice chancellor earlier, who is kind of forward thinking for a vice chancellor in that he was involved in the Changing the Culture project, which is about changing cultures of oppression in higher education. He was involved in some of the National Union of Students research around violence against female students and like violence against women, but also like racism and stuff in higher education. So I take all of that and I look at it as an assemblage, and that scaffolds various different forms of violence, and but obviously all the intersections within that. So like how people experience that at different intensities, particularly like if you're like based on race and class background and sexuality, and how there are specific points in the university where students are so much more at risk of violence and harassment. And a big part of that is also like the digital platforms. So it is kind of perversely interesting to me as a researcher, like in the last year, this acceleration to online teaching and learning, but without enough of what I would think like the safety barriers in place. So yeah, that's what I do.
That's amazing, Andrea. Thank you. I think we'd really like to hear your research in more detail. I wonder whether we could set something up that we could have let's share some of our interesting research with each other idea. Maybe the society would like to set that up. Could we respond to Samantha? I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts. I just want to respond to Samantha actually, because your question is, I'm going to read it out. Samantha said, this has been a really hard series of weeks. I've been asked in a class to read a story which has really strong rape and sexual abuse overtones this week of all weeks, quite. How do I respond to this within the class? I do think the story itself has strong critical tones, but I feel like it's asked the students in the class to do a lot of extra emotional labour. I just want to say that I think it's really good that you've asked us that, and this is probably a space to have that conversation, and to say, personally, I think it's okay for us to say no to things, and I think as women we find it really difficult to say no, and I can say that as a woman who is so overworked and overcommitted, because I'm not very good at saying no, but it's so empowering actually, and it's so okay to say no. I have no idea if that's a helpful answer, because it might be, because I don't fully understand the And if you might want to pop on and say something or not to elaborate. Yes, you are, which is great. And then we can just see, but honestly, you can say no. And that's really, really, really important, that it's okay. And I think as women at the moment, this is it's been one of the most difficult weeks, and maybe one of the most amazing weeks that could ever happen. I don't know. I want to see a movement like Black Lives Matter. I want to see something happen in the same way. And the beginning of that might be the ability to feel able to say no to something. And that is it seems such a big thing and a small thing, but actually it could be just one changing moment for you. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I think. And I would want to amplify and support whatever was happening if it was needed, so that somebody could say no to having to engage in that.
Samantha, I don't know if you want to elaborate, and then we'll go on to Fiona afterwards. I think she's got a hand up.
Sure.
Please
so
do.
It's a story in a short story collection, and in the context of the class, the writer itself is not terribly problematic, and the story itself, I don't think the writer is presenting their particular point of view, but I'm in a chat group with a bunch of students in that class, and there's an overwhelming sense that all of the women in that class are slightly horrified that we've been asked to read this story this week of all weeks. And it's a difficult story under normal conditions, but I just was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. And I'm usually a very sort of talkative person in class. I'm usually like very active, but I do feel in a way like I don't really feel like critically even engaging with this. I feel like it was too much.
I'm not surprised. We're exhausted.
Yeah.
We're emotionally exhausted. There won't be a woman here that doesn't have some resonance with what's happened to Sarah, to the Me Too campaign. And I'm just going to repeat what I said, which is, not only do I think you have the right to say no, I hope you feel that you can, and understand that you have every right to, and maybe have every right to say no to reading that at any week. You know, why should we have to keep engaging in these kinds of narratives? Actually, I feel really passionate about that, so I jumped straight in without permission, but I couldn't help myself.
Fiona, do you want to say anything?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really just echoing Joe here and saying, like, yeah, no, I feel kind of appalled that they haven't changed the reading for this week. And I also just want to say, as someone who is, like most of us, massively overworked at the moment and always, this isn't something where you should feel like, oh, but you know, the lecturer had this planned, and you know, this, you know, it'll be a lot of work for them to like, I see it as a really, really important and fundamental part of my teaching, that I am looking out for my students' well-being, and that I'm willing to be adaptive to their needs, adaptive to the context and everything like that. You know, I was teaching a seminar earlier today, which came very, very close to the bone in terms of what's been going on this week. So I didn't really think about it until you've brought it up, but I was like, well, yeah, of course I've adapted things to fit, and I've been aware of the fact that this is going to affect people. We're not doing seminars in a discrete bubble away from the rest of the world. And I think I just wanted to say, like, don't let the worry of, oh, but what if this causes work for someone? Like, no, that's not your place to worry about. It's totally okay to say no, and you don't even have to justify it. You don't have to do the work of explaining to them why it's a difficult situation for you, and you don't have to worry about going through all the social niceties of that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Samantha, your comment, and I think that sparked some interesting discussion as well. I can see, Andrew, you've got your hand up. Was that from earlier?
No, yeah, that was just a response to Samantha. Yeah, I definitely feel like there has been an oversight, and this, you know, you and the other students in the class definitely shouldn't have to be engaging with that. I had something similar when I was doing my master's, and I was doing a women in film module, and I used to watch all like the films at home, but we watched this film like called I Spit on Your Grave. And I don't know if any of you have seen or heard of it, but it is super violent, and they're very, very intense. Like, it's a rape revenge film, which I didn't know. So I started watching it and was just like completely like absolutely really badly affected by it. So I just emailed my module, whoever the seminar leader was, and was like, I cannot like attend the seminar on this. I just can't do it. But then it was also like never mentioned again. So I kind of felt like part of it was there was something missing around the procedure, around not just trigger warnings, but also like asking students and particular sets of students to engage in like a really, really difficult and probably quite traumatizing area. So yeah, always just be like, nah, mate, I'm not going to do that. You can't make me do that. I'm not doing it. Goodbye. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm just conscious of time, so I think, Maisie, if you're happy, we'll kind of wrap this up now.
I think I'd really like to do something similar again, maybe just like a women discussion panel again. I think it's a really good space for everyone. But yeah, thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. All of your contributions have been absolutely amazing, above and beyond anything we could have hoped for. So thank you, and thank you to Samantha as well, because she helped Maisie and I organise this. Thank you to Maisie for doing all the emails and organising. Thanks to everyone who attended and asked questions. And yeah, I won't take any more of your time, but I hope you all have a lovely rest of the week.
Thanks also, I'm going to speak on behalf of everybody on the panel. Thanks for inviting us. Thanks for giving us a platform, actually. Thank you for giving us a space. This is the first time I've ever been invited to take part in something actually based on women in academia. And I think at my ripe old age, I think that's actually quite depressing. So please keep this going. And I would be very, very happy to continue to be involved, either to speak or support, etc. So well done. It's great.
Thank you, guys. Very proud of you.
Well done. Well done, yeah.
Guys. Thank you.
And Annabel, thank you for being a fair facilitator.
Thank you.
And Maisie too. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, bye-bye. Bye. Thank you. Bye.